I did struggle later on with a sense of identity. So we are NRIs. Well, you not anymore, but while you were growing up, we were NRIs. And that is largely seen as a negative label these days because the sentiment is that they are Indians that are rich. If you have seen that money, please share it with me. And they don't know what's happening in India because they're not in touch with the scene. Their patriotism is misplaced. That is largely the conception. And on the other hand, we are not Arabs as well. In comparison to the second generation Indians that are born in America, in the UK, in Australia, their identity is American or Australian. They've grown up in the learning the local history. They speak the accent and the slang, and their identity is being Australian or American. But in our case, we are still Indians. If you still ask us today, I wouldn't say I'm Arab by any stretch, right? So I felt like I was nowhere. Did you also struggle with this?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest and constant struggles of my life, where it's this. I mean, it's the phenomenon called third culture, right? I mean, we are third culture kids by many ways. You were born in in the Middle East and raised, and I was born and brought up in Dubai as well. And so there is that deep connection to the city that we have identified with, but there's that sense of belonging that lacks because we are not native to the city and we'll never be. And so it creates this big dilemma of like understanding who we are, where we are, and how do we belong to any of these, constructions of, where and who do we identify closely with. This was easy to a certain extent to ignore when we were living in Dubai and we were around all of us who had similar experiences. The moment you step out of this bubble, though, is when it like actually hits you. And recently I had a discussion about this on my podcast with a very close friend of mine who had a similar experience, but in Hong Kong and in London. And it's an upcoming episode, but we totally dissect this. And this lack of belonging, on one hand, though, can be debilitating because anywhere you go, you don't fit whatever description is afforded to you, right? So in the UAE, when in the US, when I went, it was like, okay, are you Indian or are you from UAE? And I'm like, I am Indian by my citizenship, but I've born and brought up and spent my entire life in the UAE, so I identify with Dubai. Do I speak Arabic? No. Do I speak Hindi? Yes. Do I speak Malayalam? Yes. But it's also like when you can't be placed into those little neatly made, boxes is when you truly find how alienating it can be sometimes to not belong to what a stereotypical, description of a certain identity is. And so in the US, I experienced it where I wasn't Indian enough to hang out with the Indian students that were there. I definitely wasn't Middle Eastern enough to hang out with the Emiratis and the Saudi students who were studying over there. But what it also helps in this kind of like, third culture upbringing is that you can fit into many of these different abstractions or nationalities or identities because you realize what it means to be a little bit of an outsider or like being a little bit outside the box. So it allows you to connect and assimilate into different groups. So I look at it as a double-edged sword in which on one hand, it's made life very difficult to not fit neatly into different boxes. Because even now when I live in India, I'm not accepted completely as Indian because, people notice my accent or the way I dress or the way I talk or the way I carry myself. And it's a little different, from somebody who's had their upbringing over there, which is totally fine and understandable. But at the same time, it's allowed me to assimilate in all these different countries that I've been brought up and I've, lived my life in. And I'm thankful for that because it is a privileged upbringing. But at the same time, there is a lot of drawbacks to having that kind of, your identity placed in so many different little abstractions.